Hello and welcome to our fourth and final segment in the Living Globally series. This segment focuses on the decision to return home or stay abroad. My name is Gloria Kull, and I'm the Director of Young Alumni and Student Engagement here at UCLA Alumni Association. Thank you all for joining us today. To set the stage for today's event and the Living Globally series, we frequently hear from alumni who are pursuing opportunities internationally and wanted to bring the UCLA community together to learn from fellow Bruins living and working abroad. We hope that today will be an interactive session and that you'll find it helpful in your global endeavors. So before I introduce our two speakers, let's take care of a few housekeeping measures. On the right-hand side of the screen, there should be a questions panel. If you don't see this, please click on the Google Grid icon in the upper right-hand corner and select questions. Here you can type in your questions throughout the session, and if you like one of the questions you see already entered, click the plus sign. We will try to answer as many questions as possible, and also, we will also be asking our speakers some questions as well. And now on to the main event. Our speakers today are Rich Frommer and Natalie Aldern, and they're going to be sharing with us their experience and their journey. So let's start by having each of them briefly introduce themselves. Rich, why don't you start?
Hi everyone, my name is Rich Frommer. I graduated from UCLA Anderson in 1999. I have lived abroad several times in my life. The first time was for an international exchange program from UCLA. Then I worked in the corporate world and lived for 2 years in Italy. And then I changed careers and started working in international development, which took me to live in several developing countries. About 5 years ago, I moved back to the US, and I'm currently based in New York.
Awesome. How about you, Natalie?
Hi, my name is Natalie Aldern. I graduated from UCLA in 2007 with an English degree. I worked in California for a few years in the private sector, and then in 2010 I moved to Rome. I'm still based in Rome, and I apologize in advance for any connectivity issues because the European Commission just released a report saying that Italy has the slowest broadband in all of the EU. But I'm still based here, and I love living here.
Wonderful. Great. So why don't we have you, thank you for your introduction. We're going to have you share a little bit more about your story and your decision to move abroad and your current profession. So can you also, both of you, either of you want to start, you can kind of elaborate on what sent you abroad initially.
I can start. So as I said, I've lived overseas a few times. The first time, as I mentioned, was an international exchange program, which was a great experience and certainly sparked more of an interest in spending more time abroad. I had a chance not long after graduating from graduate school to move to Italy to basically help a new company get started. Lived there for 2 years, and that was a very different experience than living abroad other times. The first time was international exchange and was very much about studying and learning, and the types of pressure that I had was very different than working in the corporate world in Milan. Then when I changed careers and started working in international development, so my work is focused on poverty, I do that work outside of the US. I still do that work now, so even from New York I do a lot of traveling to these countries. And so the profile of the countries that I end up visiting is very different. But the work needs to be done with a clear understanding of what's happening in those local places. And so when I've lived abroad, it's usually to manage a project that's taking place in the country where I'm living. And now when I travel abroad, it's usually to either do some kind of assessment to help a program improve its impact, or to design a new project.
Great. Natalie, how about you? What sent you abroad initially?
Sure. Well, I didn't study abroad when I was at UCLA. And I think it was something that I kind of regretted. And so after working in the private sector for a few years, I knew I wanted to go and do a master's degree, so I was looking for opportunities abroad, or at least something that would give me the chance to partially study or work abroad while I was doing my degree. And I wanted to focus on food policy. And I have to admit that U.S. food policy is not as interesting to me as global food policy. And so it made a lot of sense for me to go internationally to do my next degree. I picked Rome because a lot of the United Nations agencies that deal with food are headquartered in Rome. And so after I completed my degree at a Roman university, I found a job also at the headquarters in Rome. And I also stayed for some personal reasons. So after I moved here, after 8 weeks, I met the guy that I married. And he's an EU citizen. And so Europe makes a lot of sense for us to be based in. And I really enjoy working at the headquarters level for my organization because it gives me the opportunity to travel a lot internationally beyond Italy. Because Italy tends to be, it's quite centrally located. It's easy to get to Africa. It's easier to move into Asia from here. And so I think that's one of the reasons, or a lot of reasons came together that made me stay.
Wonderful. And so you touch on this topic of, your decision to stay, Natalie. And so how did those closest to you respond to your decision to stay? And what was the biggest challenge since you made that decision?
I think it's an ongoing challenge, a decision to stay so far away from the place that you are from. And it's a constant negotiation for us because my husband and I are from 2 different countries and we live in a third. And so there's a lot of family obligations that you honestly just miss out on. You miss a lot of birthdays. You try not to miss weddings. Like you try to pick the really big ones, like go back for some graduations. But it has been, I think, difficult for my family and a lot of my friends from childhood and from college to kind of be as supportive as they want to be of me staying so far away. It's a 9-hour time difference, so it's hard to even talk on the phone. So it takes some effort to stay connected. But I think that everyone understands my decision ultimately. So, but it is difficult.
Yeah. So were there any professional implications for your decision to stay? I mean, it sounds like your professional career is thriving there in Rome, correct?
Yeah, Rome is the best place for me to be professionally, which is a major part of my decision right now. And I would say overall, Italy is not always the best place to work, depending on your industry. But for me, it's professionally the best thing I could be doing. And even looking beyond Italy, staying abroad is the best thing that I could do for my career, even if it's not here.
Awesome. Great. My next question is actually for Rich. How did you decide to come back to the States? And what did you leave behind I think you were in Jordan, correct? Before you came back to the States. So what did you leave behind, and was it a difficult decision to come back to the States?
I think what Natalie said is exactly the same for me, right? There are a lot of trade-offs in living abroad or deciding to come back to the U.S. Some of the challenges in particular are missing out on family events, family occasions, or friends, and just the separation from the activities that at least at some point were a big part of your life and that you want to continue to be a big part of your life. So a lot of that weighed into my decision to come back. I can't say that there was a moment in time when I said, okay, I'm moving back to the US. I mean, it kind of happened organically. As you mentioned, I was living in Jordan. I was there for a few years working on a program. And I knew from the moment I arrived that if there was a limited period of time that I would be there, I was under a specific contract to achieve a certain set of objectives. We completed that, so I knew that I needed to move on. Honestly, I thought I would be looking for another overseas post at that time. There were with the organization that I was working with at that time, there were not any specific jobs available in places where I really wanted to live. And so I started investigating other options and decided to come back to the U.S. I mean, like I said, you know, there's always this trade-off, and so I'm back now. I'm not necessarily convinced that I will be back in the U.S. forever, or that I'll never go back overseas, but I'm very happy that I did decide to come back. You know, now I've got a niece and nephew in California, so it's good to be closer to them and be able to see them a little more often, and I've got a lot of family in New York as well. I started a business a few years ago, and that's running relatively smoothly and growing, and so I'm invested in that as well, and that requires me to be in certain locations in the U.S. at the moment.
Great. And what preparations did you make before returning? Was it an easy transition back? How did that process go?
I'm laughing because it really was not smooth at all. I mean, luckily, I guess in part because I've been doing this for a long time, I'm kind of more readily adjustable to whatever situation I might wind up in. I mean, I've lived in some interesting locations, or I've traveled to some interesting locations. So when I first came back, like I said, I was not sure if I was really going to be staying here or not, and I lived out of a suitcase for 6 months. And then I finally decided, okay, it's time to stay in the U.S., and you know, I was starting to do more work here, and building up a consulting practice, and starting to think up the new business that I was starting. And so I then, only then, 6 months later, really started to invest in living here. Found, you know, so for that first 6 months, I stayed. I luckily had a colleague who was traveling for that period of time, so I was able to stay at her apartment while she was out of the country. Lived out of my suitcase, was doing a lot of traveling for work anyway, and then, you know, only then did I start really looking for an apartment, finding, really dealing with all the other things that you need to deal with when you get back, re-registering to vote in whatever new location you might be in, getting my driver's license renewed, and so on.
Very important. Great. So this question actually goes back to Natalie. Once you decided to stay, what long-term decisions did you make? And also, I guess, just like how Rich is talking about things that he had to take care of coming back and transitioning, what were certain things that you decided to do and had to like prepare as once you said, this is where I'm going to be?
I had to get a dentist. I mean, it's all of these little things that you think you can put off for a while when you're not sure where you're staying. I mean, I definitely had this same experience when I first moved here. I didn't know how long I was going to stay. But then you make a decision at some point, and you have to invest in that place. And so I did that for Italy. And one of the things was finding a dentist, finding a doctor, you know, these really mundane things, trying to convert my American license to an Italian one, which is nearly impossible. Signing a lease. I mean, that's scary, I think, when you work internationally. And Italian leases, I can tell you, my lease is 8 years. So it's a commitment. And all of the laws are really different that you have to kind of try to figure out. So you have to change your residency. It's all of these little things, but when you make the decision, the sooner you start to establish yourself, the better, and the more comfortable you can be in your new home, wherever it is.
Were there any issues that you didn't anticipate?
Issues I didn't anticipate. The driver's license one is so difficult. I mean, we don't own a car, and one of the reasons we don't own a car, I would be happy to buy one. You know, cars are more expensive in Italy than they are in the U.S. Gas is definitely more expensive than it is in the U.S., but the thing that kills it for me is the insurance. So here, they consider only the amount of time you've had an Italian driver's license. So I pay the same amount of insurance as a 15-year-old would, which to me is insane. So there's like small little rules in every country that aren't the same as your home country that you have to kind of navigate. And some of them are deal breakers, so we just take the metro.
Oh, wow. That's definitely quite a process. Okay, we're going to actually jump back to Rich. And also, before I ask this question, just wanted to tell the audience, we're having a little bit of issues for those who want to submit questions. So feel free to submit the questions on our YouTube page, and we'll be sure to answer them from there. Okay? Or our events page as well. So you can ask your questions in the comment sections for both the YouTube and the events page, and we'll be sure to answer your questions. So back to Rich. So let's talk about how when you readjusted back to the States, was there any challenge that was the biggest or anything that surprised you in the return process? I know you said that you're pretty agile, you lived in multiple places, but was there anything that really surprised you or that challenged you?
Yeah, there's always lots of things. And I think they've changed a bit. You know, as I said, I've actually done the back and forth multiple times now, but there is always what people talk about is the reverse culture shock. I mean, for sure, after you've spent this time investing and really just embracing, hopefully, the culture wherever you've lived, or I guess more skeptically speaking, putting up with the culture where you live. When you get back to the U.S., there's always differences that some of which you're really excited about and you welcome a lot, and some of which are really a big challenge. You know, financially speaking, living overseas, for me at least, was actually quite a bit more comfortable than living in the U.S., just because the type of work that I was doing took me, number one, took me to places that were quite a bit less expensive than New York. And number two, I had just the package that I was able to negotiate with my employer included housing and some other things that now I'm faced with paying all on my own. And so, for sure, one thing coming back this time was just sticker shock. I mean, the prices have gone up quite a bit while I was overseas, and then just the difference between New York and other places where I've lived is pretty significant. So that was one big change. But other times that I've come back, and this is, I don't know, you know, different people I think would see this very differently, but in a lot of places where I lived, the culture is less consumer-oriented than in the U.S. And so when I've come back, it's really been something that I notice and that I find to be very much in my face all the time. Just that there's a lot of marketing going on. There's a lot of pressure even from family, friends, peers, and just random people on the street to keep up with your neighbor in terms of the stuff. What things do you have, and what do you need in order to survive and have a good quality of life here?
Oh wow, that's fascinating. So this is a question for both of you. So for those who are thinking about moving abroad long term, what would be your advice? When you moved abroad initially, did you think it would be forever or just short term? I know, Rich, you mentioned there were certain projects that you knew that you were only out there for a certain time. But for those who are considering going out, maybe they are going for professional reasons and they're thinking they want to stay or go, what are your advice to them for those who are thinking about moving abroad?
Okay, I'm going to give some advice that I did not follow myself. And again, I have done this multiple times, so you would think I would have learned these kinds of things. But one thing that I would say in particular that I regretted when I got to Jordan is when my initial contract was for 2 years. It ended up getting extended to 3 years, so I stayed for 3. But the whole time, I looked at it as a short-term stay and as a limited even stay. 3 years is actually quite a long time to be in Jordan, but even when I was thinking it was 2 years, I just thought it was a short time. I tried to do a little bit of learning the language. For my work, I really needed to embrace, to some extent, the culture, because I do a lot of work with communities, with local communities themselves. So I needed to really understand that and have people trust me. But I don't think that I embraced it completely. And in part, that's because I didn't know if I was really going to be staying there a long time. And Arabic is a really hard language to learn, in my defense. So I just kind of thought, well, I'll learn enough to get by, but I'm not going to really invest more in the language or invest more in other aspects of life and friends and you know, just things to see and do in Jordan. Now, that's not to say, of course, I had friends and I had lots of family come to visit and other people come to visit. And I did see a lot of Jordan, and I think that I engaged reasonably well. But I do think that if you go into it, no matter how long you think you're going to be there, if you really go into it at least willing to invest as if it's the long term, I think you'll get a lot more out of the experience.
Great. What do you think, Natalie?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the first step that I would recommend is doing it legally. I know that an American passport is a really powerful thing, and a lot of times you don't need visas to get in to different countries, and people overstay those visas all the time without a lot of consequences. But if you really want to be somewhere, figure out how to do it and do it well. Get the right paperwork, and you'll just be a lot more relaxed once you get here. But then what Rich was saying, I 100% agree. Invest. Find the place that you want to live and live there. Make the friends, make the connections, get to know the city that you're in, the country that you're in, learn the language if you can, because it is difficult to move away from home. For all of the different reasons. Cultural, like I was saying, time differences, you don't have that built-in support network anymore. And so the sooner that you can start to form that, the better, and the more likely you are to have a great experience and to stay.
And I think, just to add to that, I think even whether you do stay or not, of course, when you make those friends, it's difficult then to leave that life, perhaps. But if even when you do leave, I mean, I still have very close friends in Jordan who I speak to very often, and when they come to the U.S., we make an effort to see each other, and if I'm back somewhere in the region, we try and see each other there too. So those still can be lasting friendships, even if it's not going to be forever.
That's very true. So I guess the question for both of you, too, is on the flip side. You both made different decisions about either staying or returning home. Natalie, what do you miss most about the United States? And also, Rich, what do you miss most about your life abroad?
I miss convenience. I mean, of course, I miss friends and family. That goes without saying. But I really miss convenience. America is absolutely a consumer-driven culture, I think, compared to other places. But that makes a lot of things really easy. I mean, if you need cold medicine at 9 p.m., that's possible. In Italy, that's not really possible. Like home food delivery, I miss stuff like that. I come home from work, I'm tired. Like I don't even know what the apps are called now, but I know there's one that delivers them to you. And so it's little things like that when you're having a tough day abroad, I think I start to miss the most.
Yes, there's multiple apps now. They deliver your food. They'll make it so that you can cook it if you want to feel like you're cooking it. Yeah, it's just lots and lots of opportunities.
You guys are living in the future. That's amazing.
How about you, Rich?
I think, as Natalie said, you know, you definitely miss the relationships that you've made overseas. So for sure, there's people that I miss. I think the other piece would be I miss, maybe it sounds strange, but I miss some of the challenges and the surprises of living abroad. I mean, I feel like no matter how long I live in a place overseas, you know, in a different culture, no matter how much you get to know that culture, there's always something new that you haven't discovered yet. And yeah, over time it might become what used to happen twice a day goes down to only once a day or once a week or once a month, but you still do discover those things. And so I miss sometimes, I really miss those moments where there's something completely new that I'm experiencing, or where I have an aha moment of, oh, now I understand why they do this way, because it fits so well with some other aspect of their culture or their lifestyle.
Oh, that is very cool. That is that discovery and aha moment. That isn't some, we because everything's so convenient right here. You get into a rhythm, but that is very cool. That's an interesting aspect I never thought about. So I have a question. So, how did you encounter language or cultural barriers for both of you as you lived abroad? And I guess even coming back, Rich, for Natalie, did you encounter any cultural barriers that impacted your adjustment to living abroad?
Yeah, I still encounter them every day. And I don't know that will ever stop. And I think the thing I've learned is just to accept that and not to fight it. When you haven't grown up in a culture, there's all kinds of unwritten rules that you just don't know. I mean, I don't know. Whenever I walk into a store, I can't tell if I'm supposed to pay first or if I'm supposed to order first. And everyone who is in there seems to know, but it changes from store to store. And it's small things like this, like when an old lady wants to cut me in line, I always say yes, but then the other people behind me might get mad sometimes, or I look rude other times when I don't do it. And so there's these cultural things that I think are just innate when you grow up in a place. That are not, and you have to kind of learn them. I make language mistakes every day, and I just hope that they're not embarrassing ones. Like, I know I'm being understood, but there's some words that are very different that sound very similar to me, so I have to be very careful when I'm enunciating or when I'm trying to work, especially in a professional setting. So I think it's just a part of the experience.
It's true. Rich, did you have any cultural or language barriers when you were living abroad?
For sure. And I think, I mean, language, I'll speak about language for a moment. Language is always going to be a challenge, unless you are a native bilingual speaker. I mean, I speak, because I studied them, Italian and Spanish, and so when I lived in Italy or in Latin America, I had a very different experience than living in Jordan or when I lived in Bulgaria, for example, where I didn't speak the language, or I just knew enough to get by on certain things, and that does create big challenges for sure. But even in places like Italy or Latin America, where I think I understand what people are saying and where I think they understand me, you're still going to run into these language barriers, which can be very frustrating, but also are for me, part of the fun of being there, learning and improving those languages and being able to actually communicate with the people from that country in their own language is a big, makes a big difference in what you learn, how they treat you, what they're willing to share with you even. And then I would say really the same goes for places where it might be impossible for you to really learn the language, or where, or just where you don't speak the language. At least learn enough words to show people that you care, to try and learn it. And again, you'll be extremely frustrated at times when all you want to do is get from point A to point B, and you cannot understand any of the directions or street signs, or and you can't make yourself understood to explain where you want to go. But it's also can be very rewarding when you, on the one hand, figure that out perhaps on your own, or when you manage to break through the communication barrier with someone who does speak enough English to get you there, or with your very limited language skills.
Yeah, that language skills, that issue is definitely a very humbling experience when you encounter that, having to put yourself in a very vulnerable position, but asking. And have you found that people in these various countries are oftentimes very want to help, or sometimes it's just like, okay, anyone can help me? How does that usually go?
I think people in general, in most parts of the world, people are very curious about foreigners. For sure, there are places in the world where people are thinking, oh no, another foreigner or another tourist, I don't want to have to deal with this. But I think in general, people are curious, and so they're willing to help. And like I said, I think if you show that you've actually been trying to learn something about their language and their culture, people are even more open to helping you out and kind of. I mean, I have had people when I can't get from point A to point B and I'm completely frustrated and it's clear that I'm frustrated, I've had people just basically accompany me wordlessly to get to where I'm trying to go. So I think in general people are helpful.
Wonderful. Great. So we're actually going to turn to some of the questions from our audience. We have a question from Jennifer S., and this actually is directed to Natalie. So she says, Natalie mentioned it was hard to find work in Italy. Can you elaborate on that?
Okay, well, it's not impossible. I want to say that, but every country you go to, the labor laws and the industries that are popular in that country are going to be different. And so certain types of skills and certain jobs are going to be more in demand. Italy has gone through a very bad recession, and they're still in it. And so I think that that's the example in general that I was referring to. But it's going to be challenging to find a job in another country because you have to know where to look too. So I mean, there's no Monster.com in Italy. There's some local equivalents. So you have to know where to look to find the jobs. But I have to say I have a unique case in Italy too because I work for an international development organization, and so I don't work for a standard Italian employer. So there are some Italian employers that are not hiring as much right now, but I would say in a lot of different countries, and I would say Rich probably has a similar experience because he's worked in a similar field. There are certain fields like development that it might be easier to find international jobs in.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for elaborating on that. And here's a question for the both of you. We have a viewer who asks, how do you stay healthy abroad? I think sometimes people, they have their way that they stay fit and healthy and active here in the States, and then to imagine going abroad and changing that routine, how do you stay healthy? And Rich, you move to so many different types of places. How do you create a lifestyle regimen, routine that helps you stay healthy and active?
Ultimate Frisbee.
Yay! You can take a Frisbee anywhere, right?
I mostly personally get my exercise from playing sports or just doing outdoor activities as much as possible. I don't really like the gym, but I can tell you there have been gyms in every city that I've ever lived, so you can always do that. But what I have found is that I have always found a good community where I have found a group of people that like to play Ultimate Frisbee. And I have not found that in every country that I've visited, but in a lot of countries I have. And even in Jordan, there was not anyone playing Ultimate Frisbee, and I started a weekly game. So I taught, well, there were other Americans living there who knew the game, and we were the core group that got it started, but we got a lot of Jordanians to start playing the game, and I think the game is still going every week, even though I haven't been there for quite a few years.
That's awesome. How about you, Natalie?
My routine definitely changed when I moved to Italy. I wasn't able to find the kinds of foods that I thought were healthy. So, I mean, I eat a lot of pasta and a lot of gelato. Like, that is true. I had pizza last night.
That sounds awesome.
So, I mean, I like it. And I was convinced that I was going to move back to America 20 pounds heavier. But it's a completely different lifestyle here. First of all, there's no snacking. People just don't snack. There's not vending machines filled with Doritos, which sometimes I miss. But it's you eat your meals and you eat a balanced meal, and most of the meals are made with fresh ingredients. I mean, that's not universally true, but it's not American style of Italian food. But then in terms of working out, gyms are not incredibly popular here. There are some, but they tend to be in basements, and I don't like them so much. But also running is not popular here. You don't see a lot of people out. There's a lot of cobblestones and not great open areas in Rome. Yeah. But I walk everywhere. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't have a car. So I walk sometimes 10 miles a day to get around the city. And I really enjoy it because for me it's the best way to see the city too. So I get to know the ins and outs. So we're always moving around here. We don't sit around too much, but I do travel a lot for work, and so I usually have to find other ways to stay active, and I travel to places where I can't really walk around. I'm not going to explore Freetown, Sierra Leone alone when I'm traveling there for work, and so YouTube is fantastic. There's all kinds of yoga videos on YouTube, but there are other international sports that are becoming more popular here, and I think, like Rich said, you can build your own community wherever you go. CrossFit is just getting to Italy. People are very excited about it. So you kind of have to build a new routine that works for the setting that you're in.
Wonderful. Great. So our next question from our audience are, what are some of the major differences between the U.S. and your foreign regions that has significantly impacted your life abroad?
That's a good question. I think that I thought Italy would be more like America than it is. And that was very surprising to me that I was wrong. The lifestyle is fairly significantly different. Like I said, we tend to be slightly more active here, and we don't plan for it. Like, I'm not planning to go on a 5-mile run. It's just kind of built in. The culture around food, because I studied food policy, and that's been something that's been very attractive to me about staying in Italy. The culture around food is very different. But I don't know, I might have to turn over to Rich and give that some more thought, because it's an excellent question. And the best I can say is that it's not what I expected it to be.
I think that's a fair
Go ahead, sorry.
I mean, I think that's a fair generalization of just traveling abroad, is that when you go in with expectations, you're sure to see something different. And that's kind of been my experience pretty much anywhere I've gone for a long or short period of time, if I haven't been there before. But it just, in terms of the some specific cultural things, I mean, Natalie made me think about food. I love food in general, and so wherever I go, the food, I guess, food culture and just the foods that are common or traditional wherever I am become a big part of my life. And I'm very interested in learning about why that might be their traditional food, or the stories behind some traditional food, and just learning which traditional foods I like and don't like. I've luckily not really encountered a place where there was food that I didn't like, so that's a good thing. But other things, I mean, on a very personal note, my experience in Jordan, Jordan for the Middle East is a very open culturally society, but it's much, much more closed than the U.S., for example. Things are very focused on the family and on the community, and tend to look in as opposed to out in general. I mean, so that made it, on the one hand, it just makes it a little more difficult to make friends and to really break through some of those barriers, you have to find the people who are willing to look outside. But I mean, the way that it affected me, which I think was really the question, is it makes you start to turn a little bit. Sometimes you see aspects of a culture, whether you like them or not, that turn you away, make you do the opposite a little bit to kind of rebel against that culture. And sometimes you see those things and you start to internalize them for yourself. And I can say that there were certain aspects of that culture in Jordan, whether I liked them or not, that I started to internalize and have affected to some extent the way that I might interact with people now. Even years after living there, I still think that there are some remnants of the way that you might approach a new person and thinking about what cultural issues there might be with a certain type of interaction. And so, for my work, sometimes that's really good. It's important for me to be able to think through some of those things and see things from the person who I'm interacting with's perspective. And so that's been a very positive aspect of learning these other cultures. But sometimes it affects me in ways that I wish it had not.
That's fascinating. Wow. We actually have another question that touches a little bit on also different aspects of the move abroad. But if it was difficult to make friends, this person's asking, were there ever moments of loneliness, and how did you manage the emotional side of being away from loved ones?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard as an adult, I think, to move to a new city and then to add a new country on top of that. It's not like being in college where, everyone's kind of in the same life stage and trying to figure things out, and so you can kind of build a new group of friends even if you've moved to a new city. So it's definitely difficult at first to put yourself out there. And I think I had the experience at least of moving to a new city alone before I moved to a new country alone. And I didn't do so well when I moved to a new city. I didn't do that investing in the place. And so when I moved to Rome, I really tried. I went to a lot of events and I tried to meet people. But I think the loneliness can feel more acute because you can't even talk to someone in your own language about it. And you kind of feel like you have to realize that life goes on without you back home. Things keep happening. And so sometimes it's not even a loneliness of not knowing people in the new place, but knowing that everything back home is continuing on and you're kind of not there to experience it. But technology is amazing now. I mean, I'm on WhatsApp every day to my friends who are still in California, and I just try not to wake them up at 3 a.m. because that's noon my time, by texting them. Social media is fantastic for keeping in touch. I Skype with my family on the weekends. So I think that's the best way to do it, is invest in the place that you're in, but also try to maintain those connections back home.
Great. Rich, do you have anything to add to that?
That was a great answer. I don't know if I really could add. I think just the one thing I would say is to give it time. Yes, there are, of course, going to be moments of loneliness and homesickness as well. But there's also extreme highs that go along with the experience abroad. And, I think what Natalie said, even about moving to any new city, whether it's in a new country or not, it takes time to build up that network. And I've definitely had the experience where the people who I met when I first arrived were, you certainly will meet and have interactions with and even perhaps become friends with people who you would never have been friends with back home. I mean, I've had that experience many times, and sometimes that becomes a great lasting friendship, and sometimes, it doesn't last forever, and that's fine too. That might change over time, and you'll really start to find your community and build up the friends that you really are excited to spend time with.
Great. Great. So on to our next question. This one is for Natalie. Did you learn the language once you got to your current region, or did you prepare before you moved?
I tried to prepare. I spoke Spanish before I moved to Italy, and so I was kind of studying on my own and trying to get the hang of it. But there's nothing like full immersion to really learn. I mean, when you're going to the grocery store and you can't even figure out how to buy the broccoli because it's telling you to put on gloves and you don't know what gloves to put on. I mean, you gotta figure it out. So I think that I learned a lot more once I got here. And a lot of it was just language exchange. I mean, I was actively seeking out people because I wanted to make friends, but also to meet more locals who wanted to practice English while I could practice Italian. So I did a lot of informal learning, but I think that there is something to be said for formal studying. To get the basics down, the rules of grammar will kind of set the foundation, and then once you can actually get to the region that you want to go to, the conversation will take you from here to here. I mean, you will progress so quickly, especially if you don't have a lifeline of relying back on English to fall onto.
That's very good. So actually, one more question for Natalie about your time in Italy. So we have someone who's asking, are you planning on buying property if you're staying in Rome long term? This could be also the American culture is like, oh, you want to buy a house and all that stuff. Is that something you're planning to do? I know you signed an 8-year lease, but is that something that you and your husband are looking into?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that's one of the things where sometimes I wonder if I'm falling behind, because definitely my friends in America are at the point where, you know, they have owned property for several years, or they're looking to buy a house soon, and I am not. And so sometimes I wonder if I'm missing out on something. I think Rome is a really specific place to try to buy a house because, I mean, it's been a city for thousands of years. It's not getting any bigger. They're not allowing new apartments to go up. Like, what is here is what you got. And so the housing prices are incredibly inflated in Rome, whereas the rent is fairly stable. So I'm not sure if we're going to buy a house here, but that's also the eternal debate, is where to buy the house. Because we signed an 8-year lease, and that's a big commitment. And, you know, I've been here 6 years. My husband's been here 9. So we're very happy here. But that's like a whole nother step that we might take someday, but right now, no.
Great, thank you. Our next question is actually for Rich. One of our viewers asks, how do you keep your belongings slim to make moves easier? I know you moved to so many different places. How do you, you know, with your belongings and all other things, how do you keep that convenient so that you can make the move?
I spent a lot of money on storage over the years. So that's one thing, is storage. But you know, in most places where I've lived, you can rent furnished apartments or furnished living arrangements, or move in with other people who have furniture already, so that you can minimize on the big things, which is important. I mean, when you're moving around from one place to another, the most difficult thing to take with you is the furniture. But for other things, I don't know that I have slimmed down that much. I probably have, maybe to some extent, I do have less material possessions than other people, other friends of mine, but certainly I've been now in New York for a few years, and I can see the things starting to pile up around me. So I think, you know, moving itself perhaps keeps you thinking about, do I really need these things long term or not? And I have lived in places where it felt really good at times to give away the things that I didn't think I would need in the next location. So I've given away a lot of stuff as well every time I move. Yeah, I mean, there's some strategies around that.
Cool. And I also have one more question for you, Rich. One of our viewers asked, what's the most significant difference between working in the U.S. versus in Jordan?
I think it would really depend on what work you're doing. I mean, for me, the entire nature of my job changes whether I'm in the U.S. or in the country where my work is taking place. So, and maybe this isn't really answering the question that was intended, but you know, when I'm in a country like Jordan managing a project, it's very hands-on. I'm dealing day to day with the people that are recipients of services or that are involved in providing value and services to their clients. And here, from the US, I do a lot of remote management, basically, of similar types of projects, or I travel to a country, visit for a much shorter period of time, 2 weeks or so, you know, get to know as much as I can, both before I go and while I'm there, and then provide as much insight or recommendations as possible based on that short experience. So, you know, again, I don't know if this was exactly the intention of the question, but for me, I think that big difference is the day-to-day interactions with people in another country, perhaps in another language, and dealing with some of those other barriers versus, versus kind of this more remote access and less intense opportunities to really learn and experience what the needs are of your job in that country.
Great. And then also we have a question from Lily. Rich, since you've been in several different countries, is there one you adjusted to the most, and what do you miss most about that country/region?
That is a good question. I have enjoyed living in a lot of different places, and so it would be really tough, and I think would sell short perhaps the other countries to pick one that I think was the best or my favorite. But I can say, you know, living in Italy was not always easy, but it was great for a lot of the reasons that Natalie has given. And Jordan, as long as we mention it, Jordan was, I really picked up a lot of the culture and the kind of lifestyle there, and I don't know if that had more to do with the fact that I was there for a longer period of time, or the types of people that I was interacting with, or the type of work that I was doing, where I really was involved and, you know, visiting poor neighborhoods and poor villages throughout the country to really understand what was going on. But I really did identify a lot with Jordan and absorbed a lot more of the culture and became just very involved there. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of what I might miss most from those places, in both cases, I could say I miss the food, which was great in both locations. From Jordan, there are so many amazing outdoor activities: hiking, rock climbing, scuba diving, and then just amazing history as well to see. So I would say some of those things are what I would miss most.
Great. Awesome. And also we have a question for Natalie. You actually found love living abroad, and you found the man that you married. How was that process of planning a wedding, starting all of that, and then also if you decide to start a family, will you still want to remain in Italy? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
Okay, I feel like you've been talking to my mom or something, but okay, planning a wedding abroad is difficult, but one of the reasons we did it, we didn't get married in Italy, we got married in Ireland. One of the things I can say is that it's a lot cheaper. a lot cheaper. Like I have heard the price tags of weddings in America, and it's insane to me. And so, I mean, it's not free, but the price points were a deciding factor there. But it's hard. It's hard to do. Even with that, there's little cultural things that, like, I didn't know. Decisions I couldn't make because I didn't know what they were. Did I want to have a top table? I said, I don't know what that is or what it means. So, but wedding planning was fun. I mean, it's a wedding. In terms of families staying abroad, I don't know. Either way, we are going to make some set of grandparents mad because it's either going to be Italy or Ireland or America or somewhere else. No one's going to be 100% happy, but as logical and practical and like unfamily as this sounds, I think one of the big pluses is, again, cost. There's some big costs in America that are subsidized in Europe. That I think make a lot of sense to subsidize. The cost of childcare, you know, having one parent essentially have to choose to give up their career because the cost of childcare is so high, wouldn't be an issue in Europe, in Italy, or in Ireland. But again, you give up that support network. And so we're kind of in an island of ourselves if we decide to stay abroad. And so it's a major trade-off, and I don't know which way that would fall.
Great, thank you. And so I'll ask our final question of our time together. Do you have any final advice for those who are deciding whether to return home or to stay abroad? What would be the one key advice that you would want to give them as they start that process of deciding?
I think that my advice would be to do it either way. If you're thinking about going abroad, go, try it. And if you're thinking about moving home, go home. The worst that can happen is that you go back. So if you're really feeling pulled in one direction, the way that you can know is to give it a shot. And from there, you can decide if you want to change your mind.
Great, thanks. Rich?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, it's important to realize that these days we live a pretty global lifestyle, and it's not as hard as it sounds to change your decision later. You know, like I said, I'm back now. I'm somewhat committed to staying in the U.S., but every day I wonder, maybe I will go back overseas. So. And I don't think that's out of the question.
Well, who knows, maybe for our next series you'll be abroad and we can have you talk about going back abroad and what brought you out there. So it's very exciting. Well, thank you both for just your amazing insight into your experiences, and I know a lot of our alumni who are watching or who will be watching it later on YouTube. It brings a lot of clarity into that emotional state, but also, you know, what it's like to just even be in a new place. And I thank you both for your honesty and just your candor in all of it. So thank you so much. So we so appreciate all of this, and so for those who are in our audience, thank you for joining us and participating in the discussion. To view this presentation again or share it with your friends, if you know people who are thinking of going abroad, the video will be available on our UCLA Alumni YouTube channel. If you'd like to see other topics covered in future Google On-Air events, we encourage you to provide feedback. Please send us an email with your questions, thoughts, ideas. We look forward to incorporating that feedback into our future events. And now, like Rich said, our world is very global, so we can connect with alumni through awesome technology like this, and it's very exciting. So send us your feedback and your ideas. If you're considering a move abroad and want to connect with fellow Bruins in your region or in the region that you're thinking, please contact our Director of International Outreach, Lily Tao, at internationalnetworks@alumni.ucla.edu. So we don't want our Bruins going out into the world thinking they're all by themselves. There are fellow Bruins there with you, and we can give you the resources and the tools to succeed wherever you are. So again, thank you again to Rich and Natalie, and to everyone for being part of our Living Globally series. We hope you'll join us for future Google On Air Hangouts series, and we thank you so much, and go Bruins.